Hi there, and welcome to A Song of Ice and Fire Explained. This is a video series where we explain the massive conspiracies going on in A Song of Ice and Fire. If you haven't seen our previous videos, we suggest watching those first. So let's continue on with Eddard II, A Game of Thrones. This chapter is 3,252 words long, and is told from the perspective of Eddard Stark, the older brother of Lyanna and Benjen Stark. In this chapter, Ned and King Robert discuss the threat posed by Daenerys Targaryen's marriage to Khal Drogo, and the events surrounding the sack of King's Landing, which includes Eddard's suspicions of Jaime Lannister. This chapter was probably designed to foreshadow George's original outline where Jaime would seize the throne by killing his own children and blaming the murders on Tyrion, who would then go on to join the Starks. Ned is woken before dawn to find his horse saddled and King Robert waiting. When the king claims to have urgent matters of state to discuss, Ned invites him to come inside. Robert refuses, claiming that the camp is full of ears. So Ned dresses and mounts up. Robert sets a hard pace, and soon the pair leave the King's Road to ride through the Barrowlands. They do not stop until dawn, miles south of the main party. Exhilarated by the ride, Robert complains of the glacial pace of Cersei's wheelhouse and jokingly suggests that he and Ned run off to live as vagabond knights. Ned laughs and reminds Robert of their duties and that they are no longer the boys they once were. Robert jokes that Ned never was the boy he once was, then tries to recall the name of the woman Ned fathered Jon Snow with. Ned provides the name, Wylla, but refuses to say more about her. Robert finally gets to the business at hand, a message from the eunuch Varys, his master of whisperers in King's Landing. Ned reads the message with trepidation, thinking of Lysa Arryn and her dire accusations, but finds that it concerns the wedding of Daenerys Targaryen to Khal Drogo. When Robert explains that the information has come from Ser Jorah Mormont, Ned takes offense, recalling Mormont as a fugitive who fled the king's justice after selling some poachers to a Tyroshi slaver in defiance of the law. The news of the wedding does not worry Ned, but when Robert angrily suggests an assassination attempt, Ned is not surprised. Since the days of the rebellion, Robert has held a hatred for the Targaryens that seems a madness to him. Ned recalls the angry words that passed between Robert and himself when Tywin Lannister presented Robert with the corpses of Rhaegar Targaryen's wife Elia and children Aegon and Rhaenys as tokens of fealty. Ned called it murder, but Robert called it war. It took the death of Lyanna to reconcile them again. This time, Ned keeps his temper, telling Robert that he is no Tywin Lannister to slaughter innocents. Robert angrily insists that Daenerys will not remain an innocent forever, and will soon breed more dragon spawn to plague him. When Ned reiterates that killing a child would be unspeakable, Robert responds that what Aerys did to Ned's father and brother and what Rhaegar did to Lyanna were unspeakable. When Robert mentions that Drogo has 100,000 men in his horde, Ned insists that even 1,000,000 Dothraki are no threat to the realm without ships. Robert replies that ships can be found in the Free Cities, and that many in the Seven Kingdoms, particularly in Dorne and the Reach, would not hesitate to join a Targaryen invasion. Despite this, Ned remains convinced that they would be able to drive the Dothraki back, emphasizing the importance of appointing a new Warden of the East. When Robert refuses to appoint Jon Arryn's son Robert, Ned suggests the king's brother Stannis. When Robert continues to be evasive, Ned quickly deduces that he has already promised the office to Jaime Lannister. Ned reminds Robert that Jaime already stands to succeed Tywin as Warden of the West, and that as Warden of both East and West, Jaime would control half of the realm's armies. Ned asks whether Jaime can be trusted. When Robert asks why he shouldn't trust Jaime, Ned reminds him that Jaime betrayed and killed the last king he was sworn to protect. To illustrate his point about Jaime Lannister, Ned describes to Robert how, after the Battle of the Trident, he followed Rhaegar's army back to King's Landing to find the city sacked by the Lannisters. Ned goes on to explain that upon entering the throne room, he found King Aerys dead on the floor and Jaime sitting on the Iron Throne. Although Jaime eventually rose to say that he was only keeping the uncomfortable thing warm for Robert, Ned insists that Jaime had no right to sit on the throne. Robert finds this amusing and does not consider Jaime's great sin to be that bad. He gallops off, but Ned pauses, realizing that his place is in Winterfell with his wife and Bran, since Robert will always do what he pleases. Ned becomes resigned to his predicament and follows Robert, and this is where Eddard II, A Game of Thrones ends. This chapter was most likely included in George R.R. Martin's original 13-chapter outline from 1993, since it feels as though the chapter is foreshadowing Jaime becoming king of Westeros by killing all those who stand in his way. As George wrote in his outline, Tyrion Lannister will continue to travel, to plot, and to play the Game of Thrones, finally removing his nephew, Joffrey, in disgust at the boy king's brutality. Jaime Lannister will follow Joffrey on the throne of the Seven Kingdoms by the simple exemption of killing everyone ahead of him in the line of succession and blaming his brother Tyrion for the murders. If this is what was meant to happen, then Eddard's warning to Robert seems very prudent. But as it stands, Eddard's assessment of Jaime's character couldn't have been more wrong, and the title of Warden of the East has not even been mentioned in A Feast for Crows or A Dance with Dragons, despite the early importance placed on it in the story. Instead, Tyrion's assessment of Jaime is more apt when he tells Aegon that, "My brother Jaime thirsts for battle, not for power. He's run from every chance he's had to rule." Next, this chapter has Ned and Robert's discussion take place in the Barrowlands, which seems to be a place of great importance to the story. Ned pointed them out to his king, the barrows of the first men. Robert frowned. "Have we ridden onto a graveyard?" "There are barrows everywhere in the north, your grace," Ned told him. "This land is old." In A Dance with Dragons, the story again lingers in the Barrowlands, with Theon, the grassy slopes of the Great Barrow. Some claimed it was the grave of the first king, who had led the first men to Westeros. Others argued that it must be some king of the giants, who was buried there to account for its size. Moreover, in the world of Ice and Fire, the chapter dedicated to the north talks about the Barrows land more than all other northern houses combined, except for House Stark, which again seems to indicate Barrows Town's importance to the story. Barrows Town, too, is somewhat of a curiosity, a gathering place built at the foot of the reputed barrow of the first king, who once ruled supreme over all the first men. It could be that the Barrow Kings ruled the north before the Long Night, since they seem to be the oldest house in the north, as indicated by their sigil. The rusted crown upon the arms of House Dustin derives from their claim that they are themselves descended from the first king and the Barrow Kings who ruled after him. But then, after the Long Night, the White Walker invasion was stopped at Winterfell, and the Starks built their castle on top of where winter fell and became the Kings of Winter. More historical proof exists for the war between the Kings of Winter and the Barrow Kings to their south, who styled themselves the Kings of the First Men and claimed supremacy over all First Men everywhere. Even the Starks themselves, runic records suggest that their struggle, dubbed the 1,000 Years' War by the Singers, was actually a series of wars that lasted closer to 200 years than 1,000, ending when the last Barrow King bent his knee to the King of Winter and then gave him the hand of his daughter in marriage. Lastly, the Barrow Kings are buried in barrows, while the Starks are buried in the Winterfell crypts. Maybe after the war with the others, the Starks wanted to prevent their spirits from entering the weirwood net by encasting themselves in stone crypts. "That king is missing his sword," Lady Dustin observed. It was true. Theon did not recall which king it was, but the long sword he should have held was gone. The sight disquieted him. He had always heard that the iron in the sword kept the spirits of the dead locked within their tombs. If a sword was missing, then the children of the forest can maybe access the Starks' memories and their secrets. Anyway, That's about it for Eddard 2, A Game of Thrones. In the next video, we'll cover Tyrion 2 and continue from there. In the meantime, here are some of the differences between the HBO TV show and book. In the book, Robert's and Eddard's conversation about Daenerys takes place during the writing. In the show, it takes place at breakfast. In the book, Jorah is revealed to the reader as an informer during Robert and Ned's discussion in the chapter. While in the show, Jorah is first mentioned to be an informant looking for a pardon in episode 5 during a small council meeting. Anyway, that's it for today's episode. If you want to see more of A Song of Ice and Fire Explained, please like, share, and subscribe. Also, when you get the chance, try out Fantasy Flight's A Game of Thrones board game, digital edition.